Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and I'm back again today with a returning guest. You know him, you loved him. We just talked to him a couple days ago. It is Daniel Holt. Welcome on back.
Hey, Gavin. Excited to be back.
So as we learned last time, Daniel is a senior UX designer on Magic, helping solve a lot of the UX challenges that Magic has. But it's not what you might think. He doesn't work on the digital side of things. He works on the paper side of things. Daniel, what exactly does a UX designer on Magic do?
So it's a little broad. Generally speaking, I care about how the player interacts with the game. That's the one-line definition of what my role does. On game design, that means that we're making flavorful mechanics that make sense, that act the way they should, and that they just click with the player. And then from there, I make new frames, icons, symbols that help translate those mechanics into something that, again, makes sense when you pick up the card. Think DFCs, think things like that are every time we make something that requires a frame that doesn't currently exist, I have to figure out what the best way to do that is. And then I do some user testing on that. We send out surveys and we figure out what works the best. And then finally wrapping up with the, set symbol and icons that go everywhere else. And then that leaves the set symbol, which is mostly aesthetic, but it does function as a way for the player to quickly identify a set or expansion release.
Okay, cool. So let's actually start there and then work into the other stuff. Talk to me about the set symbol for Kamigawa Nyon Dynasty, and as the commander said as well, what was your inspiration for this? And what are the things you're thinking about as you're crafting that symbol?
Yeah, so the main set, I got a little overboard. I pitched, I think, 30 concepts. I'm kind of a super fan of Kamigawa. I wanted to make sure I did this right. Naturally, I let the other stakeholders look at the symbols like I always do, and they pick their favorites, and then I kind of move forward with those. I actually didn't expect the one that became final to be one of the actual chosen one. A lot of them fell along the same lines of tradition versus modernity, that big theme of the set. So there was a duality to all the symbols, mostly that I submitted. This one that ended up getting picked, shows a natural landscape, but you start seeing that digital merging effect that we use to show that the two worlds are coming together, and that played into the more tech side of Kamigawa with the futuristic stuff.
I also think it's so interesting, like how much, for me anyway, as a non-visual designer, how much space it takes up in the expansion symbol box. It really, you look at a card and you feel the presence of that symbol, right? You see that rising sun and you see that kind of techie thing in front. Was that a conscious decision to try and make it a little larger than normal?
I think it was a lucky coincidence, if I'm honest. It is a wider symbol. If you look at the other things I pitched, it was probably the widest of them all. But it was chosen and it worked in the space. It didn't need up too much space there. Speaking of eating up too much space with the set symbol, and maybe this is what caused it. This is the first set where the backsides of DFCs, we had to remove the set symbol. We did this for a few reasons. This is another UX example of we had to fit the type line there. Because we start getting enchantment creature dash something. It was getting a little long, but it was also redundant with the front side. If you have the front side, you see what rarity it is. You flip it over, you don't need to know what rarity the back side is because it's the same as the front. And it also helped clarify to the user, this is the back side of the card.
Oh, that's a really smart, really small UX thing I wouldn't have even thought about. So I know there's a lot to talk about with Sagas. I want to get there. One thing I want to ask before we hop over to Sagas, though, is tell me about the commander expansion symbol. So what was your inspiration for this? You also designed those. Every commander set has something a little bit different going on. What happened this time?
Yeah, so with the commander set symbol, it's a shield. It's our through line. We've gotten some feedback on the sameness of the shields. I'm exploring some other options for that, and I love some feedback. So if you want to post that in the comments below, I'm happy to read that. But that is our through line right now. So we knew it needed to be a shield, and I was really inspired with what the blue futurists were doing in the main set with their origami art. So I made a shield out of origami, and it just kind of folded together really nice.
Okay, Daniel, I get it. Nice pun. Well done. All right, let's move in to the Sagas. And we talked about them a little bit. Sagas had to know a lot of UX trickiness going on here. You mentioned you removed the expansion symbol from the backside, which is all great, but they're also the first time we did double-sided Sagas. They're also, turning into creatures. I know a lot of things were talked about and considered for these. Why don't you walk through the options, the kind of tests we ran, and how we ended up here?
Yeah, Sagas were certainly the most tricky part of this to get right. We knew we wanted them flavorfully. They were enchantments, so they mattered for the enchantment versus artifacts, and they flavorfully connected back to original Kamigawa in a way we just didn't have access to in other cards. So we wanted them. But they needed to become creatures because sagas, just staying on the battlefield, don't do a whole lot after they're done. And we wanted to keep the enchantment creature count up. We'll get to that in a second with them being enchantment creatures as well as another issue that came up. But just getting that transformation to happen, it feels so natural to say transform now because that was the cleanest solution that we ended at. But it wasn't always that way. We had to explore ways to go from that saga to a creature. We tried, flip cards. That was something in original Kamigawa. Wow, if we could just make flip cards again, that would be such a direct tie. But again, DFCs are just a cleaner way to do that. We tried not flipping the art upside down, just getting all the info to fit on one side of the card. That pushed the art box so small, and it still wasn't clear how you're supposed to read the card. The actual flow of the card just was a little off. We tested several single-face sided options, but it just ended up being that DFCs were the way to go here.
And what about the gameplay decision, to go into the gameplay a little bit, of it exiling and returning transformed as opposed to just transforming over? Because if it transformed over, it could attack right away. It would keep, all kinds of stuff that was going on with it. Why that decision?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of questions personally about that as well. Some of the sagas do have haste on the backside, so you do get that effect. But that was actually a lucky solve with the exiling and coming back, which I think was ultimately Dave's suggestion, because they could just flip over if they wanted. But because of this, we were able to remove that haste and kind of slow them down a little, because originally they were a little snowbally if you got them going a little too quick.
That makes total sense, right? You turn over your saga, you attack with it right away. This makes it feel more like a normal creature, right? And I know you look back at Suspend, ironically, although Suspend creatures were given haste because in playtesting, people found that they wanted to attack with them right away. In the real world, when the cards actually came out, people didn't realize, and to this day, many players still don't realize you can attack with a suspended card the turn it comes off. So it makes sense that people would not realize when their saga flipped over, it could attack right away. So that's also a thing you get to avoid here too.
And unlike Suspend, the sagas have an immediate impact on the board with their first few chapters. Suspend just kind of sits there, and then you get your creatures. So
what are some of the other elements of sagas that you had to change, right? I know the icon, you had to make a new icon for that, right?
So once they were decided to be DFCs, we needed a new icon. The Sun and Moon coming out of Innistrad would just not work here. So all the sagas are being told by the living historians. They are telling this the story, and then it comes to life. So it starts with that closed fan, performative. And then at the finale, it springs open and you've completed the story and have your creature. And that creature happens to be an enchantment creature, which we've not done outside of Theros. But we knew we wanted them to stay enchantment creatures to play well with the set and have your enchantment creature count be a little higher. What we ultimately decided, we thought about adding a new frame, but that would get confusing because now there's two frames that mean enchantment creature. And the Nyx frame from Theros was just kind of generic magic-y enough to work as an evergreen frame. And that's what we move forward with. So anytime you see an enchantment creature now, it will be using this frame.
Were there a lot of discussions about coming up with some kind of new frame element to indicate that this is from Kamigawa and those were from Theros?
It was less about saying where they're from, and a lot of folks concerned that the actual Theros frame didn't make sense here. But majority ended up ruling, and I'm pretty happy with the outcome that we have such a clean solution.
Yeah, I mean, the gameplay aid of seeing something as an enchantment creature is so important. When I play with the time shifted Courser of Prufix, like an enchantment creature, and it doesn't have that frame, it's so easy to forget that it's not an enchantment creature. So I think that was a great solve, and players will understand it's an enchantment creature. It'll be fine. So there's one card in particular I think you probably had a hand in somewhere along the line, and it's a pretty marquee card for the set. That is Tamiyo. What'd you do with this one?
All right. This one, from gameplay, we had to decide what was different. This is our first time having a spoiler alert, Ferexian Planeswalker. We had to figure out how that played a little different than a normal Planeswalker. There were a lot of things tested, and this spanned across all the teams. I think all of the leads were kind of in on it to be like, hey, we should do this, we should do this. It was kind of Dave Humphreys hearing suggestions from everyone. And we ultimately landed on this completed mechanic that lets you use a new symbol, which is the Ferexian hybrid mana symbol. Never existed before. It ended up being a fairly straightforward solve of taking the green and blue hybrid mana symbol and using a Ferexian mark in there to show those two symbols combining together like we did with the original blue and green symbols.
Awesome. Well, I know that card has excited a lot of people, and that mana cost definitely drew a lot of is this real? Is someone just posting this on the internet? Would they actually do that? And no, the symbol looks great, and people identify it now as a pretty wacky thing. So Who knows? Maybe we'll see it in the future. Who's to say if it'll be more completed planeswalkers? Anything else, Daniel, that you worked on in this set in particular that you kind of wanted to get at from a UX perspective?
So ninjas was another thing that came up in game design that we wanted them to feel like ninjas still. And with the new modified mechanic, it kind of made it tricky if we brought back straight ninjutsu. You would bring in your ninja, you'd lose all the work you made on that modified creature, and it kind of felt like a drawback. So we tried other mechanics to help that experience, like where all the modifications would say on the ninja that came into play. But this became a little more swingy because you didn't know what was going to happen. And it just wasn't ninjutsu. Like we wanted that word back as well. Luckily for us, the spectrum of the archetypes made it to where blue black didn't have a ton of modifications. That was mostly in the white, red, and green. So it worked out to where ninjutsu didn't actually eat into that space and just plays well in the set.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And actually, if you want to hear more gameplay insights like that from Daniel, you can go check out our last chat, which there'll be a link up on the screen. I don't know, right about here. So you can go click and take a listen. I thought it was really insightful. Thank you, Daniel, so much for coming out again. Any last words you want to say before we close on down and, all your work from Kamigawa is out in the players' hands for them to go enjoy?
Not a whole lot, Gavin. I'm really happy the set's finally out. It's been a pain to keep it to myself for so long. So I'm glad fans are, getting to see it, getting to play with it, hopefully understanding it immediately thanks to the UX that we've put so much work into, and just having a blast with Kamigawa.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. And if you out there listening have any thoughts about frame elements or UX or the set in general you'd like for Daniel to know, please drop it in the comments down below. I'll talk with you again soon. And in the meantime, may playing your game be easy thanks to the UX of Magic. You got this.
Yeah, the secondary commander, I forget its name, it's a giant boar spirit. It triggers off of putting auras on your opponent's creatures and goading them. We've tried to put that in a few products before. Just the idea has charmed several of us in the design teams of just enchanting your opponent's stuff and getting benefits from that. So I'm glad it finally hit a home here.